Hello everybody, welcome back to the channel. My name is ScopeSF, and today I just wanted to go over my primary Magic the Gathering Commander deck that I have affectionately titled the Abzan Gallows. Yeah, this is my kind of like my heart and soul deck, the one that I love the most, and the one that I specifically look for cards whenever a new set comes out. The first thing I look for is what can I put in my Abzan Commander deck. And I made a video about the full deck list last year. Since then, a few good cards have come out that kind of changed up how efficient this deck actually operates. And it allowed me to reevaluate the deck each time, see what cuts I would make, kind of fully understand what efficiency is, whether or not a card feels good to have in the deck, or if I just get irritated when I draw it, and just the ability to look over my deck, think about it critically, and get proper upgrades for it has really been always a great experience. It's what I love most about new sets in Magic. So even though I made like a full primary deck tech, I'm not going to go into super detail about how exactly the deck works. It's just an Abzan Persist combo deck. You know how Persist combo works. I never shut up about it. So, the core of the deck is still absolutely the same. It's just that the cards I have added have made it better. So, going over the primary changes, the cards that I ended up taking out were Bastion of Remembrance, Birds of Paradise, Explosive Vegetation, Juniper Order Ranger, Nethroi Apex of Death, I'll talk about that first in a second, Rampant Growth, Sakura Tribe Elder, and Survival of the Fittest. And to replace each of them, I replaced it with Anaphens of the Foremost, Calling Ritual, Dig Up, Incarnation Technique, Legions to Ashes, new card from Brothers War, Master Chef, the Meat Hook Massacre, and surprise, Thran Vigil, which is also from Brothers War. So, each of these cards, these are different revisions over the course of time, but with each revision, I essentially took out a card and then replaced it with something else. And the first big one that I ultimately found, I took out Nethroi as the commander, and replaced him with Anaphens of the Foremost. Reason being, with Nethroi, he just kind of felt like a win more card, in a way. He felt like a backup plan or a backup win condition if I didn't exactly meet the full criteria for the Persist combo. Like, if I had to play out Persist creatures because that's all I could really do, and then they would die and end up in the graveyard, well, it's not exactly a creature lost if I have Nethroi and I can use his mutate ability to get that creature and whichever other ones I need from my graveyard onto the battlefield, and then probably just do a full creature recursion cycle with, like, let's say, Safehold Elite as the Persist creature, Malira as the one that negates counters, Viscera Seer as the sacrifice outlet, and then Zulaport Cutthroat to actually do the damage over time. I could get all of those with Nethroi's mutate ability, but I found that I never actually did. And if I'm only running Nethroi, partially because, he's an Abzan commander, so I can consistently I have options to the colors that I'm looking for, but then also only run him just for his mutate ability, which probably isn't ever going to come up. I would much rather be running a card that I know I can use consistently. So I'm using Anafenza, and I think she's going to be the head of the deck moving forward. Because from the command zone, pretty much anytime I want to, she is a hate piece that can shut down a lot of decks, and you can get her out really early. Like, with Nethroi, his mutate ability, that's 7 mana. You have a lot of setup to do with that. It didn't feel as worth, like I said, running 7 mana for potentially having a backup plan, as opposed to getting out a hate piece that people have to deal with, or Otherwise, they're going to feel the hits of losing their creatures from their graveyards, immediately going into exile. It may seem a lot more like a fringe case to get the benefit out of Anafenza, but I found that people perceive her as a lot scarier than she probably actually is. So she's also a great way to bait out any removal that your opponents would be throwing at you because of the threat assessment. Like, granted, you obviously want your opponents to use their removal on each other in a multiplayer game, but you'd much rather have the removal thrown out on a fringe hate piece that might not actually do anything, as opposed to one of your combo pieces. And then, even for the value of Anafenza, like, let's say that your opponent uses a total of 2 removal pieces on her, so you cast her for 3 mana the first time, removed. 5 mana the second time, removed. 7 mana the third time. That 7 mana, for the third time from casting her is what you need to get the mutate off of Nethroi. So ultimately, Anafenza just the more efficient and felt like the more impactful commander between the two. So if I could go back and redo my tier list, I would put Anafenza in front of Nethroi. Granted, they're both very interchangeable, and they're both easily S tier. I think that Anafenza is just more S tier than Nethroi. Otherwise, removing Bastion of Remembrance. When I got rid of this one, it was because they released Meathook Massacre, which they're both black enchantments, and they both basically do the same thing for what I want. Because, like, the only difference is, like, I don't gain life from the Meathook Massacre when any of my creatures die, unlike Bastion of Remembrance. But Meathook Massacre felt like it could be applied in many, many more situations that I would want to take advantage of. Primarily being the first clause that I could pay X, and each creature gets -X until end of turn. By taking out Bastion of Remembrance and replacing it with Meathook Massacre, not only am I not really losing anything, because I'm only caring about dealing damage when my creatures die, but I'm also actually getting a free board wipe just by, switching out cards. And also, technically, Meathook Massacre is cheaper if I want Meathook Massacre as a legendary enchantment only for that second clause. Whenever a creature you control dies, each opponent loses 1 life. And I don't necessarily need it for the board wipe. It only costs 2 black mana. X is allowed to be 0. As opposed to Bastion of Remembrance, which is 2 generic and a black, so 3 mana total. And yes, I get a 1/1 white human soldier creature token with this, but I never do anything with that soldier. It is literally not worth the extra mana. So, Meathook Massacre, strictly an upgrade over Bastion of Remembrance. The only reason I would say go Bastion of Remembrance for literally any reason whatsoever is because it's a cheap budget alternative. So there's that. Next, I took out a couple of these ramp cards, so namely Birds of Paradise, Explosive Vegetation, Rampant Growth, and Sakura Tribuilder. I didn't really particularly remove any of them for any particular reason. Like Sakura Tribuilder and Birds of Paradise, those were recent removals. I think I just wanted to make room for Thran Vigil and Legions to Ashes, which just do more for the combo portion of the deck. Well, at least Thran Vigil does. Legions to Ashes is just a very good removal card. And especially because, like, my standard for adding removal into this deck is when it specifically says non-land permanent. It doesn't allow me to destroy lands, but I don't want to. I think that land destruction is just not a feel-good vibe, so I don't want to run it if I can afford it. But the fact that it's still non-land permanent, I can destroy literally anything else that I want to. That's my standard. The flexibility that you get from something like that is huge, and Legions to Ashes meets that mark. So that's why I wanted to add that as another removal spell to the deck. And then Thran Vigil actually being a combo piece. Very important. And I think those two replace the Sakura Tribe Builder and Birds of Paradise because I didn't necessarily need that much more ramp. Even though I still do like Birds of Paradise and Sakura Tribe Elder as cards. Explosive Vegetation. I know this is my most recent cut. And when I did that, I used it to remove, or I removed it so that way I could add Master Chef. I'll go into that one in a little bit. But Rampant Growth. The reason I got rid of that particularly was just because I found other ramp cards that are better. Namely, Culling Ritual and Dig Up. Dig Up is massive because it is literally the same thing as Rampant Growth, except it costs 1 less mana if I'm using it as a Rampant Growth effect. If I have extra mana later in the game, I can straight use it as a tutor spell that doesn't really have any restrictions. Like, I don't have to sacrifice a creature as if it was Diabolic Intent. I don't have to lose 2 life as if it were a Vampiric Tutor. So, Dig Up is just a straight upgrade of Rampant Growth. So, of course, that's why I'm adding that. And then I also added Culling Ritual to replace one of the ramp effects. Reason being, Culling Ritual gives you a lot of mana with how it's worded. So, this is essentially a ramp card, but kind of like Meat Hook Massacre, it's also just a free board wipe. So, by adding Culling Ritual and replacing it with another ramp effect, let's say I forget exactly what I took out at the time, but let's just say it was Sakura Tribe Builder. I'm removing a ramp card to add just another ramp card that also works as a board wipe. So it provides more versatility to the deck, and it just feels like a straight upgrade there. Also between, all those cards like that, added Incarnation Technique. This one is interesting. It functions mostly like a Hail Mary, because when you're casting this card, you are always going to demonstrate it. So what the card essentially means is mill 10 cards, then return 2 creature cards from your graveyard to the battlefield. Now, I mean, they're separate triggers, so like you have to mill 5 and then return 1, then you have to mill 5 again and return another one. You can't just like mill 10 and then choose your 2 best ones. But the demonstrate effect feels really, really free when you're doing this, because you get to choose the opponent. Either the game has gone on for so long that it's like you and one other opponent, and while you're doing this on your turn, they can't really react in any meaningful way, or they can't choose a creature in any meaningful way that it would stop you from performing your combo, because this is essentially, you're taking a little bit over 10% of your main deck and then pulling out combo pieces to put just straight on the battlefield. You're getting a lot more value out of it, let alone the fact that you're doing this twice, than they could by doing it once. So ultimately, this is just a really impactful card. I think just the value that you're getting out of it is worth the inclusion in the deck. And then lastly, throughout all of this, I took out Juniper Order Ranger, because this, out of all the cards that kind of work against the -1/-1 counters in the Persist combo, this one was absolutely the weakest, and it always felt the worst to draw. As in, whenever I drew this, I would always much rather have a Vizier of Remedies, or a Solemnity, or a Malira, or even the Kintree Spirit. I always felt like I would much rather have literally anything else. And this card was just kind of more of a mana dump, that if I were to lose this by either a creature kill spell or, Path to Exile, Swords to Plowshares, whatever, this would just be a bad feeling of, I put this many resources into this card and I just lose it. It felt like too much of a high profile target that just didn't do anything. Because I never cared about putting the +1/+1 counters on the Juniper Order Ranger from its own ability in order to turn it into a big beater late game. Like, yes, you could probably do something like that, but it has never happened to me in any of the games that I played with this deck. It just never felt worth it. All of this compared to MasterChef, which, you know, I always glossed over the backgrounds because I thought they were a super cool mechanic. I really like the idea of backgrounds, but I would never build a deck that actually had a commander that would choose a background. So I look at these legendary enchantments, and I never considered adding any of them into the 99. But when I saw somebody talk about, I forget who it was, I think it was somebody off of EDH Rec who built a legendary tribal deck. And because all the backgrounds are legendary enchantments, that was a big part of their theme, is just putting these legendary enchantments in the 99. When I saw that you could do that, I reevaluated the different background options that there were. And I do remember specifically there was another one that worked kind of like, you know, Meat Hook Massacre. Whenever a creature you control dies, each opponent loses 1 life and you gain 1 life. I forget what it's called. I really don't care. I did consider adding that one into the deck, but I already have 3 of these effects between Meat Hook Massacre, Cruel Celebrant, and Zulaport Cutthroat. I don't need another one of those. It doesn't add anything to the deck that the deck already doesn't do. However, with how few cards there already are that fight off against the -1/-1 counters from Persist, the fact that this one allows us to do that by having our commander on the battlefield when it happens, also another reason to choose Anafenza, even if you don't cast her early. If you have this enchantment out, this enchantment is a lot less is a lot less threatening. It's much more of a non-factor compared to like a big beefy creature like Juniper Order Ranger, which anybody could feel like they could deal with because creature removal is so prominent, as opposed to a do-nothing enchantment that doesn't really do much of anything until your commander's on the field, and even then, it's a very minuscule effect on its own. This is a very non-threatening card, but it does exactly what we want it to do for this deck, with whenever other creatures you control enter the battlefield with an additional +1/+1 counter on them. Once you demonstrate that, oh yeah, there's a reason that MasterChef is in the deck, and how it contributes to the combo, absolutely worth running a 2 generic 1 green mana enchantment as opposed to a 3 generic 1 green 1 white creature that doesn't that only helps with the game plan in the exact same way as the other card does. Plus, if I'm being completely honest, I watch MasterChef. I like the show, both the all of them really, the US, Canadian, and Australian productions of the show. So, I like the flavor that comes with this. And also, one last point of note. The reason that I cut Survival of the Fittest, I just don't own it. And I would much rather, this card is great in theory, but I would much rather have this deck list exist full of cards that I do actually own, that I actually paid for, that I actually can play in paper. So, not running Survival of the Fittest, or I'm not going to include it in any deck list anymore until I actually own a copy, if I ever do decide to own a copy. Because the fact that all these other cards feel like they're doing more than enough to make up for not having Survival of the Fittest in the deck, I think it's worth cutting. And probably not worth considering moving forward. This is what the new total deck list looks like. Take a screenshot, read over it. What be you? Enjoy it though. And I'll be keeping on looking for different upgrades that I could potentially put in with any new sets that are coming out. But as of today, November 23rd of 2022, this is what the deck looks like, and this is what I'm happy with. So thank you all for watching. Hope you enjoyed, and I will see you all in the next video.